Ignition sequence starts.
Good morning. Welcome to Mission Control Houston and a live look inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room. The specialists you see here are keeping an eye on the space station's systems while helping the Expedition 62 crew members with the tasks they have left to complete this week. Commander Oleg Skripochka and flight engineers Drew Morgan and Jessica Meir have spent much of this week supporting science experiments in the station's laboratories, while crews in Europe have reported that the cosmic particle detector on the outside of the station is back in business after an upgrade completed during 4 recent spacewalks.
Welcome to Space to Ground. I'm Sandra Jones. This week, science and research abound aboard the International Space Station. NASA astronauts Jessica Meir and Andrew Morgan have been busy conducting research related to bone loss as part of the Osteomics 2 experiment. Using the unique microgravity environment of the space station, this investigation compares the genetic expression in space of a type of bone cell called osteoblasts to samples back on Earth. By gleaning insight into how bone loss occurs in space, researchers on the ground will have a better understanding of osteoporosis, which can enable the development of potential countermeasures to slow or stop the progression of the disease. Following a series of successful spacewalks on the alpha magnetic spectrometer, the device is back up and running better than ever. Last month, NASA astronaut Andrew Morgan and European Space Agency astronaut Luca Parmitano completed the final spacewalk to repair a cooling pump on the alpha magnetic spectrometer. The payload's Operation Control Center in Geneva has reported the AMS has since been powered on and is back in the business of collecting particles to further our understanding of dark matter, antimatter, and the origins of the universe. Coming soon to station, SpaceX's 20th cargo Dragon resupply ship. This vehicle will blast off from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida, containing a variety of science investigations, supplies, and equipment. Research highlights include experiments focused on particle foam manufacturing, water droplet formation, and other cutting-edge investigations. This week's question comes from Ray, who wants to know what the minimum age required to be an astronaut is. There is no minimum age required to be an astronaut. The basic requirements include U.S. citizenship, a master's degree in a STEM field, 2 years of related professional experience, and the ability to pass a NASA astronaut physical. If you meet these requirements, get your resume ready. We will officially begin accepting applications on Monday, March 2nd. For more information about application, check out nasa.gov/astronauts. Keep sending in your questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll see you next week.
It was only a few years ago that the 2 Americans who are in space right now were selected as members of the 21st class of NASA astronauts. When they return to Earth in April, they'll have spent more than 200 days in space. Now, Jessica Meir has spent even more time in other extreme conditions during her career as a scientist. Before she was a test subject in space for experiments on human physiology, the PhD marine biologist satisfied her craving for biological knowledge with months of field research on native birds of Antarctica and the Himalayas. And she brought back pictures and video.
Biology was always my favorite subject growing up. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it was just because of this inherent connection and interest in nature. Maybe that came from my mom, maybe that came from where I grew up, but I just always loved biology class. I went to the Antarctic 5 times. 4 times was for my PhD research. I was working at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is part of UC San Diego. We were looking at the diving physiology of animals in general, and the work that we were pursuing then in the Antarctic was looking at the diving physiology of emperor penguins. How they could support this extraordinary behavior, diving deeper than 500 meters and for longer than a half an hour on a single breath. We put physiological data recorders on the animals. I was even fortunate enough to dive where we were doing our research with the penguins, so emperor penguins whizzing around you. You can imagine what an extraordinary feeling that is. And it was just completely eye-opening. And we did measure heart rates as low as 3 beats per minute and down around 5-6 beats per minute for a whole 5-minute period. So that's really extraordinary if you think about comparing that to an exercising human or any animal exercising on the surface of the earth, where you have this characteristic exercise response, your heart rate increases to get more oxygen and blood flow to all of the exercising tissues and muscles. So these animals are down there, they're also exercising, they're swimming around, they're catching fish, they're foraging, and they're doing that while lowering their heart rate. So it's this really unique dive response. So for my postdoctoral research project, I kind of went to a different extreme. I became very interested in the bar-headed goose, which is the species of goose that migrates twice a year over the tallest mountains on the planet, so over the Himalayas. If somebody's thinking about climbing Everest, then they go weeks in advance, they go to base camp, they allow themselves to acclimate, their physiological processes catch up a little bit, get some more red blood cells on board. These birds are doing that crossing in 7 to 8 hours. They need far more oxygen in order to support themselves while they're flying than they would if they were walking or down here at sea level. But they're doing that in an environment that has an oxygen limitation. So how are they doing that? We decided to try and look at this problem by training bar-headed geese to fly in a wind tunnel. And in order to make sure that the birds would be comfortable with me and my team, we imprinted the animals. It's particularly strong in waterfowl. So the first thing that a duck or a goose sees after they hatch, they look at as their parental figure, and they imprint. So I got some eggs and I had the birds imprint on me. So I was there from the time that they hatched. They would be hatching in my hands, coming out of the egg, and I was the first thing they saw. So they thought that I was their mom and I was a modern-day mother goose. I had 12 goslings that were following me around everywhere I went. They look to you for everything. You're going on walks, you're cuddling with them, taking naps. It was really an extraordinary experience to have that connection with an animal. And they grow quite quickly. Within a few months, they had fully grown wings. And so we brought the birds back to the University of British Columbia and started training them to fly in the wind tunnel. And we outfitted them with physiological recorders, little backpack recorders to measure heart rate, and then again, oxygen level. And then they also were outfitted with a mask, so a really lightweight mask that we made out of a dental mold material. And that allowed us to collect the air that they exhaled. And then through that mask, we could also change the amount of oxygen that they were breathing in. So there was a tube where we would flow nitrogen into the mask and basically decrease the overall oxygen level so that we could simulate altitude. So we were flying these birds at about 1/2 to 1/3 of the amount of oxygen that we have at sea level. 1/3 of the amount of oxygen is equivalent to higher than the summit of Mount Everest, so higher than that tallest peak. And interestingly, as we predicted, the birds could still fly. And it really isn't just one adaptation. There is really a host of adaptations all the way through what we call the oxygen transport cascade. So everything from getting the oxygen from the air into their lungs, getting it into their blood, getting it down to the individual cells and into the mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell. So they really have adaptations at every step of the way. So before I was an astronaut, and actually even before I went to graduate school, I worked here at the Johnson Space Center for 3 years for the Human Research Facility. So our group, we were coordinating all of the life science experiments that were conducted back then on the space shuttle and then also on the space station. And I find that a really interesting connection now because first I was coordinating that kind of science on other astronauts. Secondly, I was doing all these experiments on all these different animals, using the animals as the subjects, and I was the experimenter. And finally, it's come full circle where I will be the one that's experimented upon. And these types of experiments, these physiological and medical experiments, are really important for us in terms of understanding all of the effects of microgravity and the spaceflight environment on the human body. And this will be even more important as we begin to undertake longer missions, when we go back to the moon and eventually go to Mars. With the Artemis program, we are planning those missions now. And it will be even more important for us to make sure that we can deliver astronauts effectively and are they're able to function at their destinations, and to make sure that we can get them home safely as well. So by understanding all these processes with the decades of research we have now on the International Space Station, we can conquer and apply that toward these future flights. I'm Jessica Meir. I'm a scientist and a NASA astronaut.
Experiments being done on the International Space Station cover many scientific disciplines, including medical science that could benefit the more than 5 million people affected by Parkinson's disease. Alexander Gerst, the European Space Agency, worked on an experiment with a particular protein crystal that may hold some important insights. His crewmate, NASA astronaut Serena Aughnan-Chancellor, walks us through what that was like.
Welcome to Expedition 57 on board the International Space Station. Today we're doing some really cool science. This is Alex Gerst over here with me, and we are working on Parkinson's disease. What we're looking at here is a special protein kinase, or protein crystal structure. And the reason scientists have sent it up here to the International Space Station is because these protein crystals tend to grow larger and of much better quality. Parkinson's is a disease that affects over 5 million people worldwide, and scientists are constantly searching for a cure. And what we discovered was that here in the microgravity environment, these crystals really like to grow. So if scientists can better elucidate or clarify the structure, then they're better able to develop an inhibitor drug for Parkinson's. And not only an inhibitor drug, but an inhibitor drug with very few side effects. So what Alex is doing here today is he's obviously working on the wall, is what it seems like here in microgravity, and he is. He's got a microscope above him, and he's got a plate that he filled with this special protein crystal structure just a few days ago. He gave time for those structures to crystallize, and now he's examining them under the microscope. And he's actually interacting real time with the principal investigator on the ground to look at the crystal structure, to help improve the lighting and the clarity, and then also take pictures, which will then be sent back down to the ground. So here on board Expedition 57, we're very proud to be taking part in this experiment. I think in the past few years, scientists have realized that the microgravity environment is such a unique environment to grow things like cells or protein crystals. And it provides a new way to help us look at diseases in a better way, to help us develop new medications for these diseases. And so we're happy to be taking part in this science up here.
All of the experiments on the International Space Station are the brainchildren of scientists on the ground, men and women who come up with a hypothesis to test and then design and develop an experiment to do so. In this episode of the new season of NASA Explorers, we watch as the scientists work through the last stages of getting their experiment loaded onto a SpaceX cargo ship for the trip to orbit.
We're excited to see what kind of data that we collect from this first project. Any sort of data we get is going to be brand new information for us and for...
Three, 2, 1, and 0. And a liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon spacecraft, packed with science and supplies for the International Space Station, humanity's home in low Earth orbit.
So we were originally scheduled to be on SpaceX 14, but about a week before launch, our project got canceled from that launch because of some issues with the controlled environment.
Science in space can be complex, and no matter how meticulously things are planned and executed, sometimes those complexities get in the way of launching on time. When equipment used to house the experiment didn't look perfect for a final pre-flight test, there was no choice but to push it to a later flight to ensure mission success.
As a first-time investigator, that was, it wasn't devastating. It was just sad that we weren't going to be able to launch because up to that point, it had taken us about 2 years to get there. Ultimately, it gave us about 6 months more time to reevaluate that controlled system and do some more groundwork to prepare for the launch in December of 2018 on SpaceX 16.
After the setback of being moved to a later launch, our team of scientists now has only days left before their experiment will be loaded into a SpaceX Dragon capsule that will carry it to the International Space Station. Elaine and Parastu, the co-founders of a biomedical startup, are at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, readying their research for microgravity.
Since this is our first project that's launching to station, this is also our first time working at the Kennedy Space Center. So it's been an exciting moment to, not just see the visitor center, go look at the touristy things, but also get past the security gate and into the actual laboratories.
While some experiments are loaded into Dragon in the weeks leading up to launch, others have more time-sensitive components. These require precise preparation and loading in the days before liftoff. For those scientists, laboratories at the Kennedy Space Center that are a part of the Space Station Processing Facility, or SSPF, become a home away from home. Here, they can carry out the critical last steps of preparing their experiments for delivery to the space station.
So we got here on a Thursday, and it's currently Sunday. Put in a big day yesterday filling up these wells with gel solution and getting ready for handover at 7:30 a.m. on Monday, ahead of launch on Tuesday afternoon.
Once you arrive here, you kind of get into this other time. It's this weird little time bubble where everything is now L-based, and L being launch, and it's L minus 72, L minus 48, L minus 24, and it's just building up to the actual launch time.
With those precious remaining hours, the team is prepping their microplates for microgravity. Microplates are also used in labs on Earth, but these were specially designed to be self-contained.
My role on the project was to design the actual microplate themselves. The challenge on orbit, though, is that generally fluid experiments have to be conducted in the glove box, and the glove box is very time limited. It's very crew intensive. So we've designed this self-contained microplate that can be operated outside of the glove box. It has all of the containment to keep the fluids inside.
So we have loaded these wells with hydrogels that they were carrying drugs, and we want to actually look at the effect of microgravity and how the release of the drug is affected when we send it to the space station. So the concern that we have is that if we have bubbles that are in the wells, it may be difficult for the plate reader to be able to read the amount correctly. So we are being very careful with how we are loading the waters.
So what's left to do today, once Parastu here finishes filling the microplates, I'm going to take over and seal them up completely. Once that's done, we'll add all of the labels onto the microplates and put them in a self-contained box that is what they'll actually travel to the space station on.
3 years in the making just to get here.
Once we do that, we'll turn it over to Cold Stow. Cold Stow will take it from there, and the next time we'll see them, we'll be on orbit, and the crew's opening them up.
Cold Stow, short for cold stowage, is the team responsible for making sure that the research stays at the right temperature on its journey from the lab on Earth to the lab in space. This handoff is one of the last steps before being loaded onto the rocket. The cold stowage team will take Elaine and Parastu's experiment and keep it safe and sound before it's loaded for launch.
Does it feel like a relief?
Well, it'll feel like a relief when we actually see it take off. And then it'll be finally...
It's a huge step, though.
Yeah.
It's done. It's out of our hands at this point.
Yeah. It'll be officially out of our hands when it leaves the Earth's surface. So that'll be the moment that we're finally done.
Until we get data, and then we get to process it.
That's just the beginning, actually.
So what'll happen now is, now that we've handed them over to NASA, NASA will deliver, they're on their way right now out to Dragon to be loaded. And the launch hopefully will happen tomorrow at 13:38. I've been involved since the very beginning, which is approximately about 3 years ago. It's been a long road, but like everything, it's a lot of work. It's worth it. And we're excited to help Timpanogen and get some data for this project.
Overall, we're going to get a lot of data from just this one project and those 2 experiments that are going to inform a lot of different things for us. All right.
It's a little windy out here today. It's a beautiful day. It's a little windy. It's got me concerned. My launch intuition is tingling a bit. It's always an awesome and amazing and special thing to see.
The laboratories of the International Space Station are not the only place where scientific research takes place. The outside of the vehicle is home to a number of experiments, including the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor, which is continuing NASA's work of gathering data for researchers who are looking into changes to Earth's climate.
Follow the sun. Presented by Science at NASA. The sun. It inspires songs, warms us, and grows our food. Life on land and in the oceans, the daily weather, and long-term climate patterns happen primarily because of the energy we receive from our closest star. Even tiny variations in that energy can affect the workings of our planet's atmosphere. NASA uses instruments to follow the sun and monitor the amount of solar energy coming to us. The latest instrument to do so, the Total and Spectral Solar Irradiance Sensor, TSIS-1, makes those measurements with unprecedented accuracy. TSIS gathers information from its perch aboard the International Space Station, or the ISS. Flying on the platform that the orbiting laboratory provides has allowed TSIS to continue NASA's 40-year record of tracking the sun's radiant energy, one of the longest and most important climate data records gathered from space. Over the past several decades, Earth's ice mass has diminished, sea levels have risen, drought and precipitation patterns have changed, and growing seasons have shifted. To understand the causes, including human influences, of these changes, and to refine the models used to simulate Earth's climate, researchers must know the amount of incoming solar energy. Peter Paluski, TSIS lead mission scientist, explains, when there's a balance between incoming energy from the sun and the infrared radiation Earth emits, climate remains steady. An imbalance means energy is either being stored in the system, causing temperature increases, or lost, causing temperature decreases. Energy from the sun makes up half of the balance equation. Even though the measurement record shows that the sun's solar energy output has not had a major influence in recent climate change, that output needs to be monitored continuously. It is arguably the most important variable we need to know to understand climate, says Paluski. Trying to understand climate without measuring the sun's input is like trying to balance your checkbook without knowing your income. Climate is measured over long time spans, decades to centuries and longer, unlike weather that changes over small time scales. To be able to connect measurements over long time periods, continuity and accuracy are key. TSIS has 2 sensors. The Total Irradiance Monitor, as its name suggests, measures all of the radiant energy from the sun, and the Spectral Irradiance Monitor measures how that energy is distributed over ultraviolet, visible, and infrared wavelengths. The latter helps scientists understand where in the atmosphere solar energy is being absorbed. For example, TSIS spectral irradiance measurements of the sun's ultraviolet radiation are critical to understanding the ozone layer. Ozone in the stratosphere absorbs ultraviolet light. This heats the stratosphere and drives changes in atmospheric wind flow that can propagate down to the lower atmosphere and impact climate. So many factors influence Earth's climate, says Paluski. We need to continue learning how they all interact. TSIS is helping us characterize the sun's behavior and how Earth's atmosphere responds to the sun. For more science from the International Space Station, Go to www.nasa.gov/ISS-science. To continue following our closest star, visit science.nasa.gov.
Along with being a platform for scientific instruments to study the Earth, the International Space Station is a place for human beings to get a view of the planet that's unlike any other. Fact is, the men and women who have been there say the terrific pictures that they share with us are still a bit lacking. It seems that seeing the super wide-angle view of the home planet with your own eyes changes your outlook on the world. It did for former astronaut Mike Foreman.
You're strapped into the space shuttle on the launch pad, and the countdown gets to 0, and you feel like you're just in a car wreck because the solid rocket boosters light off and they give you a kick in the backside like you were just rear-ended at a stop sign, literally, and launch you into space, and 8.5 minutes later you're there and float out of your seat and start taking in those views, which I can't describe. That's one thing I wish I was better at. It was actually describing that experience of being weightless or experiencing the views of the Earth. It's just, so incredible. I was there for 2 space shuttle missions, so I was never there for more than 16 days at a time, but every time I had a spare minute, I would go to a window, take a look out. Spacewalks always seem to be very busy and task-focused events where I got to do this and I got to move over here and do this, and rarely did you have a minute where you could just say, just take a minute and enjoy the view. But there were those minutes every once in a while, and the view from outside the spacecraft, with that full panoramic vision through your helmet visor, was just incredible. So I always kid those astronauts that don't do the spacewalks. I said the view from inside here through this flat window is pretty good. The view from outside is just amazing. You see the colors of blue that you've never even seen before, the shades and hues of blue, and you see that fine, thin atmosphere that protects us. It's just almost overwhelming when you first see it. I think if you're not a conservationist before you go to space, you're at least partly a conservationist when you come back, because when you see how thin that atmosphere is, that protective layer that we have here that allows us to walk around like without a spacesuit on down here, and breathe the air, you think, wow, we really have to take care of this because it does look so fragile from space. I think if we could get all 6 billion people, or however many we have now on this planet, to see that view for just a few minutes, I think the whole planet would change.
If you'd like to get another look at that feature or any of the others we've shared with you today, check us out on YouTube and Facebook. There are the addresses. And if you're out on the internet anyway, you could also check out Houston We Have a Podcast, where we talk to folks about their work in all aspects of space exploration. Today, the episode, Gary Jordan picks up his conversation exploring the history of the International Space Station, from its planning and development to assembly, and now its 20th year of utilization by astronauts. Go to nasa.gov/podcasts for today's episode. That's where you'll also find all the previous podcast episodes and the full library of all the NASA podcasts, which you can also hear on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud. This is Mission Control, Houston.